When the file was closed, it was made explicitly clear that there was no evidence that Madeleine is dead.
Também não foi ouvida a testemunha vizinha da segunda casa dos McCann, na Aldeia da Luz, que diz ter testemunhado um facto pouco comum sobre o carro alugado pelos McCann, onde os cães detectaram odor de cadáver e restos que podem pertencer a Maddie. A vizinha assinou um documento em que autoriza a passar o seu depoimento que a identifica, mas por receio de ameaças e pressões, não mostra a sua cara.
In case you missed that, the witness who lived near the McCann's second home, that's the villa, says she witnessed an uncommon fact about the McCann's hire car. She also signed a document authorizing the broadcast of her deposition.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Now, this unnamed witness reminds me of Melody and Luther Stanton in the Ramsey case. They were also neighbors who, rather than seeing things, heard things, but they were so intimidated by the media shitstorm surrounding the case. Remember, these are neighbors, people living there, people that are going to have to deal with the media once they engage with them. Well, they ended up being either completely peripheral or even virtually silent on what they knew.
É uma questão interessante quando eu saí da investigação e do Departamento de Investigação Criminal de Portimão em outubro de 2007, nada se sabia sobre esta viatura, sobre esta.
And so we see Detective Amaral standing in front of a recreation of the vehicle in the driveway. He's gone to quite a lot of effort to do that. And he says, this is an interesting matter. He says, when I left the Criminal Investigation Department in Portimao in October 2007, nothing was known about this vehicle. Now, make no mistake, when the McCanns were made Arguidos a month earlier, in September 2007, this occurred virtually on the basis of the dog alerts alone, as well as inconclusive evidence surrounding the testing of the tiny amounts of human traces that were recovered. While on the one hand, one can explain away this evidence as being almost no evidence, and its inconclusivity thus being legally deemed to be not evidence. Another way of looking at it is you are looking for a missing child, but instead of finding nothing, what you do find are tiny, tiny traces of what could be her. If these traces are from this missing child, doesn't this suggest an almost successful attempt to clean away and cover over what happened to her?
It doesn't matter what I believe. It only matters what I can prove.
Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, I've written 5 books on the Madeleine McCann case, including the last book, which dealt with my last visit to Playa de Luz, Deeper into Darkness. You might want to check that out. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So the bottom line is what can be proved in court. And yes, in a legal sense, you could argue that there might be a certain possibility, but because the evidence is so damaged, so thin, so minimal, you can't prove probability.
You and Dawson, you both live in the same dream world. It doesn't matter what I believe. It only matters what I can prove. So please, don't tell me what I know and don't know I know the law.
But Amaral hints at something more than a little hinky surrounding this question of the vehicle being aired day and night, if his witness is to be believed. And now, before we deal with Amaral in more detail, I want to pull back for a second and just acknowledge the woods that we're dealing with here. Let's for a moment think about this case to a completely different dimension. Let's intuit this case using this, right? Through smell. Think about this case through the lens of a dog and through the sense not of sight, which is what we humans prefer, but smell. Think about the McCann case in terms of, rather than doing a visual search for a missing child, what happens if you do a scent search? Well, we end up with 2 basic results from a scent search. 1, there are strange smells in apartment 5A. Once you go into apartment 5A and you investigate that apartment through the sense of smell, you find, well, there are smells there that we need to pay attention to. And it appears there are some very strange smells in apartment 5A and in the garden bed below the balcony, and on Madeleine's toy, and on some clothing. But they're diffuse, they soften, they're diluted, they're sort of washed out. And the only reason these smells have survived is likely because they seeped into the grout between and under the tiles in the apartment that's behind the couch. Remember, both the cadaver and blood dogs alerted here, and perhaps soaked into the material. Is it wood possibly? If it's chipboard, biological traces would have been sucked into it like a sponge. That's of the bedroom cupboard. That's where another alert occurred as well. That would make it very hard to clean away, all traces. Number 2, there are smells in the rented vehicle. And these smells in the silver Renault Scenic somewhat counterintuitively appear to be stronger, more pungent than those inside apartment 5A. Cadaverine is one of those chemicals that increases in intensity over time, certainly to a certain point. Now, what's very interesting with the alerts, one of the alerts is actually on the key fob of the Renault Scenic, which suggests someone touched the cadaver and then touched the key. But there's something else quite hinky about the airing of the rented vehicle that is worth looking at as well.
Odor a cadáver e vestígios fluidos corporais, nomeadamente depois definiu-se perfil de ADN de Madeleine McCann com 15 alelos.
Now, to be safe, Amaral should really say that this was allegedly Madeleine's DNA. Obviously, you can see he strongly believes it was, or that there were signs that it could be a DNA based on 15 matching alleles out of a possible 19. In other words, it was a 78.9% match, almost an 80% match. But here's where it gets really hinky. Someone comes forward when the McCanns aren't charged once they leave Praia da Luz, and then she relates what she saw.
Mas depois, meses depois, há uma jurista que vive aqui perto que veio relatar que após a chegada, após a entrada dos McCann nesta vivenda, a partir daí começaram a ver a bagageira aberta.
Eu todos os dias faço esta rua para fazer a inversão de marcha ali num beco e cada vez que passava aqui pela casa e observava o carro e o carro estava sempre com a mala do carro aberta.
Now you might say, why didn't this lady, this jurist, just come forward right in the beginning? Why not come forward earlier in the investigation? Well, I think this is one reason why.
Mr. McCann, hello, good evening. Could you just give us some words, please? All right, how do you feel? How do you feel, Mr. McCann?
Tired.
Did you expect this decision today?
Could you let the car in, please? That's all I've got to say at the minute.
Isn't it interesting that Jerry leaves the police station in a silver Audi, a car very similar to their rental vehicle? In fact, if you didn't check, you'd assume it's their car. It's the same car. Well, it's not. But the point is, you can see why a neighbor wouldn't want to engage with the media, because you'd have this kind of, this is one of the highest profile cases in the world ever. And you would end up having this situation on your doorstep. I mean, you live right next door. And people coming to see the McCanns would come and want to talk to you as well. You'd end up being badgered endlessly by the media, and also you'd be giving up your privacy. So that's unfortunate, you may say, but is that really how this critical eyewitness was overlooked? I mean, is that all there is to it?
Quer fosse dia, quer fosse noite. E eu passava muitas vezes à noite e sempre verifiquei. Era um facto, fiz a participação e pronto.
É importante relatar o seguinte, é que essa senhora, essa jurista, nunca foi ouvida na Polícia Judiciária porque não foi considerado relevante o seu depoimento, que se estranha.
Did you catch that? Because ultimately when the McCanns had bugged out of Luge, she did come forward, and as I say, this was when the McCanns were arguidos, and she did report it, and she says she did. And yet, according to Amaral, her deposition was apparently suppressed. It was ignored. It was regarded as irrelevant. And if this was strange, it was about to get stranger.
Depois que, enquanto não foi ouvida, enquanto se remeteu uma carta rogatória para a Inglaterra, depois vieram familiares de Gerald McCann e Kate McCann dizer que dentro desta bagageira transportaram comida do supermercado, objetos que compraram no supermercado, nomeadamente uma embalagem de carne de vaca que terá entornado sangue.
A grande questão é como a família soube da testemunha, apesar de ela não ser ouvida pela PJ, e tentou responder aos factos observados.
And I remember when I was researching this aspect in terms of writing the books that I wrote, I found several news stories where there were responses to this idea of smells in the car and saying that it could have been something from fish that they'd bought or meat that they'd bought. And this seems to be an acknowledgement, firstly, that there were blood-like substances that had leaked into the vehicle, and secondly, that this caused the vehicle to smell. And so, when you see the neighbor observing the vehicle with its doors open, right? What are you actually seeing? What does that picture represent? It represents smell. In effect, it represents an effort to get rid of smells in this vehicle. This vehicle that the dogs later alerted to. And we know Michael Wright admitted as much in his police statement while denying that they cleaned carpet or ventilated the vehicle. Now, since it was July or August 2007, the height of summer in the Algarve, the hottest time of the year, it's hard to imagine not doing that if you had a serious smell on your hands. And like the traces found seeped under the tiles and into possibly the material of the cupboard, these traces apparently seeped into the fabric of the rear compartment, and we all know how hard that can be to remove when something like milk spills into it. Wiping alone won't do it. The Portuguese media outlet Correio da Manhã published an article at the time, it was in September 2007, about the vehicle being returned late after the rental contract ended, and also suggested the McCanns intended to buy the vehicle and have it tested by their own investigators. Something else that was noted was just the sheer number of kilometers that were clocked on this vehicle. It just seemed exorbitant. So what do you think? Is Amaral's witness reliable? Did she really give a police report? Was it not considered relevant for the right reasons? I mean, not all witnesses are credible. I mean, think about Jackie Dilson, who implicated her ex Chris Wolf. Was she reliable? And this is a tough question to answer because this woman has chosen to remain anonymous, and yet she has appeared on camera, sort of, and spoken to Amaral on camera. What's clear is that he seems to think this is important evidence. So important, he recreated the whole thing, taking a vehicle, opening all its doors, and presenting his documentary in front of it, apparently in the same driveway of the villa where the McCanns originally stayed. I've actually been there myself. That is going to a lot of effort. It's also interesting from a neighbor perspective, all the Tapa 7 staying in the apartment surrounding the McCanns, surrounding apartment 5A, told stories supporting their version of events, but the one neighbor who was not part of their friendship circle, Mrs. Fenn, she said she heard children crying in the McCann apartment prior to the incident, going on for over an hour while the McCanns were out having dinner. And now you have another neighbor, also not someone within the McCann's orbit, witnessing something that casts the story in a different light. I mean, neighbors tend to notice things, right? And apparently the neighbor above the apartment did, and apparently this one, who lived next door to the villa, did too. And I can tell you that particular driveway is very, it's very private. It sort of curls around. It's kind of like in a cul-de-sac and it curls around. And so you wouldn't just have any passerby coming through there. And so it is quite unfortunate from the McCann's perspective that this neighbor happened to notice something, and who else would besides a neighbor? So why is this information so obscure? Isn't it because it's been drowned out by all the other so-called witnesses who have been only too happy to come forward and beat their drums, shout from the rooftops in terms of the media narrative? And think about it. Why, when Netflix deals with the issue of smells, scent dogs, and alerts in the vehicle, do they fail to mention this? And why do they fail to ask Amaral about this?
When the file was closed, it was made explicitly clear that there was no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and that there was no evidence to support the assertion that Kate and I were responsible in any way for hiding Madeleine's body.
Jerry's right, and so if you accuse the McCanns of doing that, of hiding Madeleine's body, you would have to prove two things. A, that Madeleine is dead, which would be difficult, and B, how the McCanns hid their body. The onus is not on them to prove they didn't do anything, as much as it is on accusers to prove that they did. And without biological traces, definitive confirmed traces and samples, you can't do that. Now, you could argue that there isn't no evidence, but in a strictly legal sense, if he claims there is no evidence, unless you're able to provide definitive evidence, what can you prove, which so far investigators haven't been able to do. They've only been able to provide smidgens here and there. Well, legally, the McCanns enjoy, to some extent, the benefit of the doubt, the whole innocent until proven guilty aspect. This is why the ruling from the ECHR, that's the European Court of Human Rights, is so interesting, because a European court has basically upheld the notion that although there is not sufficient evidence, they still found in Amaral's favor, in the sense that they said his claims weren't entirely spurious either, and it seems they felt he had a right to express his opinion on it. This suggests to me, and I could be wrong, that court gave some legal weight, not none, to the detective's case. Would you guys agree with that? I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.